Josh is going to be here in a minute. Let me ask him.
Right before we go.
Okay, I would like to call the City of Oregon City Planning Commission meeting for Monday, September 23rd, 2019 to order. So do we have any public comments on anything that's not on the agenda?
Nothing.
Okay. And then we're here to talk about our public hearings. We have the Development Code amendments, including equitable housing, planning file LEG 18-00001, amendments to the recently adopted code for clarifications, correction of errors, or improvements.
All right.
We have staff report.
We do. Thank you very much. So as you recall, we went through a big round of code amendments recently, and the City Commission adopted a majority of that. They had a couple items that they kept open, and so we could do some additional research on that. This is not those. When we did the original adoption, we thought, we are adopting a lot of stuff. We are bound to have missed something or created an error or thought of something later. And so that's what we're doing now. This is our code cleanup, which is any improvements, corrections, clarifications. Most of them have to do with code amendments we did make, some don't. Let's talk about them. Where's your background? So I'm going to go through chapter by chapter in order. In your packet, you saw a couple of things, which you should be familiar to seeing, which is the matrix of what's changed and the actual red lines of the code amendments. If you have any questions or comments on any of these, please catch me while I'm talking, and then I'll make notes. The idea is to have these before you, and then we'll eventually bring them to the city commission soon. We're gonna marry the two projects back together. So we had these little ones that we wanted to vet through you before we go back and marry it with those other changes that the city commission is looking at. So they were still noodling on some stuff that had already been to planning commission as well. All right, so the first one has to do with allowing an easier process to modify a sidewalk so that it can go around an existing tree. And so we made a couple changes in our code to do that. But essentially what it's saying is that the city engineer has the authority to allow changes to our general street design standard rather than, the 5-foot sidewalk with a 5-foot planter strip. We can meander that sidewalk to be curb tight or to go the other way so that the planter strip is bigger if we want to save a tree. And this allows that to be done administratively without any public review. So the purpose is to save trees and to make it easier rather than have to go through a public process in order to do that. This is the other chapter, 1741. So the one we just talked about was the street tree chapter. So what happens if the tree is on the public right of way and we want to save the meander of the sidewalk? This is the same thing, but assuming that the tree is on private property and you want to meander the sidewalk, we had to change two provisions to basically say the same thing. So regardless of where the tree is physically located, public right of way or private property, the sidewalk can be meandered, and it sort of prioritizes allowing us to keep those trees by making this process easier. The next standard we have is for single-family homes. We had a chapter that has design standards for single-family homes. That also applies to manufactured homes. Staff is proposing to change that so it does not apply to manufactured homes in manufactured home parks. We have been applying them to in manufactured home parks, and it can be a little tricky. Often the manufactured homes have to be modified with trim or some other type of thing to meet the design standards in order to encourage manufacturing home parks to get in with designs that don't meet our design standards, and so people have a greater housing options. We're proposing to remove that. If they had a manufactured home on a single family lot by itself, they would apply. So we're only talking about exempting them in a park. Speaking of manufactured home parks, we also had proposed a couple of setbacks. So we created this new manufactured home park standards, and it has a 15-foot setback around the buffer, and we're not proposing to change that, but it also had 15 feet between dwellings within the park, 15 feet between a dwelling and an accessory structure. Well, some of these are long or narrow spots, and 15 feet pretty much makes it where if you want, in some cases, if you want a double wide, you have to stay with a single wide because it boxes out the amount of space you have. So we proposed to remove that. We also proposed to tweak the accessory building standards too, so it's clear that they can put an accessory building pretty much anywhere they want, except for it has to be at least 5 feet from that rear yard perimeter setback. So there's still that setback around the edge of the park, but they have flexibility in where they could put accessory structures. One of the other things that we proposed to remove is there was a 10-foot setback between the home and the interior street, and so that's also proposed to be removed. We did have some customers who wanted to build like a carport in front of their home or accessory or a home that was wider or something like that. And so we have been working with customers who this new code didn't make easier. It actually made it harder. And so these will remove those barriers for that so that we can continue to see our manufactured home parks thrive.
So they can or can't build accessible carports in the front?
They can now.
They can now?
Yep.
So that could be right up next to the road. They could pull right into their carports.
They don't do that for a manufactured home park. You have a central road that comes through, and so you wouldn't pull in from the road. You would pull in from the interior road in that. So it'd be a slightly different configuration than, say, a subdivision where you would pull in from the main road.
The city is changing that code, but the people who own the parks, manufactured home parks, still control, right, what they want and how they want those to be designed. They can't come to the city and ask the manufactured home park to change their rules. You know what I'm saying?
They can be more restrictive than the city rules, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Next, we made a couple of tweaks. What we were worried about is that one of the things we did is we allowed 1 and 2 units in conjunction with a non-residential use in commercial zoning designations. So think about 7th. You have an office downstairs, and maybe you can have 1 or 2 dwelling units upstairs. Makes sense, right? So we said you can have, 1 or 2 dwelling units in conjunction with a non-residential use. Well, what we didn't account for is what if someone has sort of like this much non-residential use and it's really just a single-family home and underutilizing the land on Malala or something like that. And so this provision says that it clarifies that you can only have 50% residential use with a non-residential use. So if you have 1 or 2 units, you can only have 50% of the square footage be residential. So at least half of the use has to be non-residential. In neighborhood commercial district, this is kind of what we already had, but the words were kind of funny, so it looked a little strange. So we clarified the wording. So the standard was always in place in neighborhood commercial, but in mixed-use corridor and mixed-use downtown, we never had those provisions in place. So we wanted to make sure that all of these places that we envision as a regional center or higher in density do actually build out that way, and we just don't get a lot of single-family homes in places where we anticipate other uses like retail or something like that. Willamette River Greenway. This is a new one. There's a copy of these code amendments before you on the dais, and there's some in the back as well. This was not included in the packet, but I do want to include it in the packet as of now. Also, I want to acknowledge that we had some comments that we forwarded to the Planning Commission from Mr. Edgar as well, related to housing. All right, so back to Willamette River Greenway. We added some exemptions to River Greenway. River Greenway is an overlay district, and it protects the view from the river towards the city. And so we added some exemptions to say there's some little tiny base stuff that you can do without going through a whole public process review. For example, anything that you can do over the counter with site plan design review, think added window, small changes to landscaping, things like that, shouldn't be subject to a big type 2 review. Also, anything that's allowed outright through our historic review board policies should also be allowed outright in our Willamette Greenway. This is one of the reasons why we caught this provision. We just updated our historic review board policies. You guys saw that? Yes.
So a few months back, before this group got on here, we had a discussion about some property that was right on the Willamette River on the other side of the train tracks. Does this impact that at all, or is it just saying they can't build anything 35 feet height, or does it still allow property to be developed on the Willamette River on the other side of the train tracks? You know what I'm referring to? Remember there was the whole property?
The
The Kanema neighborhood, yeah, and that's remember they had a private group down there that was selling land spots down there?
Yeah, there was the dock thing.
Right,
the
so
code
does this
enforcement one.
impact that at all, or is this in reaction to that?
No, it's not reaction to it. It is, when we did the code amendments, we didn't really open up Willamette Greenway. Willamette Greenway had a provision that said residential uses are limited to 35 feet in height, which is odd because you could have an office building right next to some other building that either it's a full apartment complex or it's retail below and apartments above or condos above or something like that. And one could be taller and one could be shorter, and it's unclear why. So we're proposing to remove that provision. It's sort of an artificial provision that limits residential heights within the Willamette Greenway to 35 feet. We don't know why it's there. We checked with DLCD. It does not have to be there. It's just a provision that we self-imposed. So this doesn't have anything to do with what we saw in the past is just, since we opened up Willamette River Greenway and this project was to allow additional housing opportunities, we had this provision that was limiting them arbitrarily. So we wanted to remove that.
Do we not allow usages on the other side of the train tracks, even if there is some soil there? I know people are using it for vacation spots to sit and watch the river, but do we not allow any housing on the other side of the train tracks?
There is one property that is split up into multiple easement areas. It's zoned single-family residential, I believe. So in theory, if you have one single-family residential property, you get one single-family residential home.
Right.
But
So if there's a flood, if they're on that soil on the other side, that could wash it away downstream?
yeah, if someone actually wanted to build in places very close to the river like that, they'll have to go through the floodplain review, which means you have to go a foot above the flood stage. And,
Pretty high, Oregon City.
yeah, it's just, what do they say with geologic hazards? You can do things, you just might not get a very big building, and it might be very expensive. So if you have one property, you can build on it, otherwise the government is sort of doing a takings right.
So the Greenway Overlay District is Oregon City, kind of a code, not state or federal or anything like that?
We implement it, but that's a good question. The Willamette River Greenway applies to all the jurisdictions along the Willamette River.
Good.
And I think a lot of jurisdictions appear to have some of the original code that was written. We sure did and didn't tinker with it throughout the years. But now we want to make sure that we're removing any conflicts. And in the case of the height limitation, it's just unclear why we even had that in the first place.
Okay, thank you.
Off-street parking and loading. So we wanted to clarify where fleet parking fits into everything. Going through the police station sort of opened up this question for us. So when you have fleet parking, how does that fit between your min and your max? And with them, it fit between their min and their max parking, but what about other zoning designations? Does fleet parking have to fit between their minimum number of stalls and maximum? And so what this proposal says is, yes, it does, except for if you are industrial, the general industrial, campus industrial, mixed-use employment. If you're industrial, it's assumed you have some fleet, so it doesn't have to fit in those min and max, and those min and maxes are really not meant to account for fleet either. So this both discourages fleet to go into higher density zoning designations and help support it at the industrial zoning designations where we anticipate it. Also, we did a provision that you don't have to do the landscaping buffer between the parking area and the building if you have just a drive aisle with no parking stalls attached. So if you can imagine a building on the street and you have to go on a driveway next to the building to get to the parking lot in the back, we had standards that you had to do landscaping between that drive aisle and the building. And so now we propose to remove that. It helps have a little bit more flexibility with some of these constrained spots. Mechanical equipment, so we're almost done here. Mechanical equipment, we clarified that they apply, well, we didn't clarify. We proposed to change the requirements that the rooftop mechanical equipment, those standards only apply to new buildings. So what we had is, throughout time, we had adopted standards, I think it was 2009, that if you have mechanical equipment, it has to be screened. Well, when you have existing buildings that update their mechanical equipment or get a new mechanical equipment, and now it has to be screened, turns out that's really complicated because the building has to hold that structural load, and so you have to reinforce the building. In some cases, it's not always so easy. In most cases, not always so easy. So the mechanical roof standards that talk about screening would only apply to new buildings, or if there's one in a new addition or something like that. If you're building it new, you can anticipate that weight, and then it would be fine. Also, sometimes it looks a little funny if it brings more attention to it because you're just doing a larger screen if you have a really flat roof. All other ones should be powder coated or painted, so they wouldn't be that shiny, shiny metal. That is all I have. We anticipate going to the City Commission with a work session October 2nd, and that is to clarify the remaining outstanding items, which are, should we change the height limitation in the mixed use downtown? Planning Commission had reviewed that and made a recommendation of one small tweak. And then also, we're going to talk about all of this code cleanup stuff as well. Then on October 16th, we're going to put this all together and have a hearing on everything at once with all of our final code amendments. They did provide direction to staff on food carts. So that included allowing permanent food cart pods in mixed-use downtown outside our downtown design district, which was not in the previous code. And then also tweaking some of those food cart standards as well. Met with the Mobile Food Cart Association to go through some of our standards, and they had some suggested changes. Also, they're giving us we had a work session for final direction on homeless shelters. And the draft that came out of that included a conditional use for homeless shelters in mixed-use downtown and mixed-use corridor. So think of some of the bottom area of the city, the flat part, and then the spine up 7th and Malala. And then nowhere else. And then it included some provisions of if you are a shelter, here's some of the standards that we would expect, including, yearly communications with your neighbors and things like that. And then, of course, we're still looking for direction on the height limits and the code cleanup. So if everything goes according to the schedule, which we don't know, then we would be in first reading in early November and second reading in late November, and then it would be effective 30 days later. Is there any other questions on any code amendments or any tweaks? If you see any if you see any grammar changes or anything like that, just shoot me an email and we'll fix it. All right?
Okay.
Thank you.
Can we go back to the first slide you showed?
Yeah.
On moving the sidewalk around?
Yeah.
For protection of trees, and it depends on, that's in the planter strip, or the tree may be on the residential property.
Yeah.
Is there any provision there to curve the street if it's a tree that you just can't quite get the sidewalk in there? I know there's been talk of a raised sidewalk, and I'm not 100% sure I understand what the raised sidewalk is. Do they bump it up in the air and the roots go underneath the sidewalk, or?
There is some provision. There's a lot of American with Disabilities Act provisions on sidewalk protections and when it's okay to do things or not. Josh can talk to us more about the intricacies of sidewalks, but we want to comply with those, and so this will allow the street to be curved. The street can be curved anyway. Our problem that we're trying to solve is a lot of cases when we already have a street there. It's not that we're putting a street around a tree, it's that the tree grew up too big and now we have to figure out what to do, and it would probably include either ripping out the sidewalk or something like that, because anything else will go through the land use process, so we don't really need this provision. This provision would be helpful for things like the tree on the pool property. If they wanted to do a curb-tight sidewalk, they could have done it with these code amendments. They could do it administratively. Right now, you'd have to go through a type 2 land use process to amend, to ask if it's okay to have a curb-tight sidewalk without a planter strip or something like that.
Lord, tell me that picture wasn't taken here in Oregon City.
Now it's a Google.
Because it looks like the whole tree was shaped flat to fit the sidewalk.
It's a terribly narrow sidewalk, right?
You're right.
Terribly narrow. No. It's just for illustrative purposes.
Maybe it was photoshopped.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay. So now we're moving to LAG 19-000003, the Beavercreek Road Concept Plan, Code and Zoning Amendments, Geological Hazards, Upland Habitat, and Master Planning.
The never-ending story.
Thank you, Vice Chair Gage. I'm going to provide a little bit of a background of the topics this evening, and then I have Josh Wheeler, our Assistant City Engineer, and he'll provide a little background on geologic hazards, and then we'll come back to my presentation and we can discuss.
Okay.
So real briefly, this is welcome back to the Beavercreek Road Concept Plan Code and Zoning Implementation. As we move forward this fall, we're kind of taking a couple of topics every meeting to kind of allow these topics to simmer and people to truly understand and get the questions answered. And then at some point, probably in November, early December, the Planning Commission will be able to be at a place where they can recommend to the City Commission a package of red lines and zone changes. This evening, we have geologic hazards, upland habitat, and master planning requirements. Those are further outlined in the attached staff memo. To start out with, we have, sorry, I gotta figure out which one I have. So these topics were based on Planning Commission recommendation and public comments. As always, we have a tracking matrix of both Planning Commission requests and comments and public comments. And so every Planning Commission meeting, based on direction, staff will update that matrix and we'll keep adding to it based on new requests or new public comment. And it's really a way to track to make sure that when we get to a place to recommend a package of code amendments, the Planning Commission is comfortable that the items that were brought up through the public hearings process have been addressed. So on the three items tonight, really what staff is looking for is, do you have enough information to make a comment on staff recommendation if they have any? Or do you concur with staff recommendation? Do you have additional questions and what are they? And then staff can bring them back at a future meeting. Or do you have a whole other topic that, wasn't addressed that you want to bring up? So I'm happy either way. I have 2 out of 3, we have a planning recommendation coming out of the memo and we can discuss that. So the geologic hazards presentation this evening was based on a request from the Planning Commission to learn more about our geologic hazards code. No code recommendation is being proposed as part of the Beavercreek Road Concept Plan. But this is more of a general overview of how the city implements the geologic hazard code citywide. So we won't be looking at, specifically zooming in on this area and talking about any particular piece that you could ask questions to Josh this evening. So I'm going to open up his presentation. Just a second, and I will give you, Josh, the clicker. Sorry. There you go.
All right. Hey there. It's just 7 slides, so just a small overview, but feel free to ask any questions. What I've shown you here is a picture of the general geologic hazard overlay in the Beavercreek concept area. The yellow is the geologic hazard areas. Geologic hazards are either steep slopes, which are 25% or more, or historic landslide deposits. And you see that in this slide here. So you see the big yellow there. Only some of that yellow is the landslide deposit. So that's the historic landslide deposit in that area on the eastern edge of the Oregon City Golf Club. And then this is what the steep slopes look like. The dark color, I don't know what color we're going to call that. So the dark color is the 25% or more area, and then the lighter color is the buffer to that. And so we have a buffer of that.
Nothing's planned on those steep slope areas, right? No industrial buildings or anything?
There's nothing planned in the whole area right now.
I know, but I mean, we've seen the plans in previous sessions here where the buildings could go and all that. I'm just wondering, nothing's coming close to the steep slide areas, is that correct?
No, there are some. So, for example, We recently looked at a development that was interested in redeveloping the golf course. They had houses that were within the geologic hazard area, and they do have the right to build on those areas if they meet a number of analysis requirements.
Only because, as we've learned from Christina and from several meetings with Dogami and other ones, you build on the top of those, and it's just pushing those slides, and it's going to create more of a slide area down the road.
Correct.
So I can't understand why anybody would want to build in any of those geologic hazard areas, knowing that there's no insurance for slides.
Yeah, and I can give what code allows. So code, for the most part, allows anyone to develop a piece of property as long as they meet a number of standards. And so they do have to do a lot more analysis, but they still have the right to build. The only thing they cannot build on is a slope of 35% or more. That's not allowed by code. But if you want to be in the 25 to 35% area, you're more than welcome to build as long as you meet certain standards.
So
And I think I'm going to go over that a little bit.
Same code that was in place when we built the Newell Creek that slid and slid and slid, and the city didn't do anything about it? They approved
no.
it? So are these tougher standards now?
Yeah, the standards
We know
were-
what happens in our
The
city.
standards were put in place in 2010. The slides that have occurred since then were on previous codes. So when Nancy Kreshower was here as Public Works Director, she's the one that, she had a big background in geologic hazards. She had that code put together. And as you'll see here in a minute, our code has actually been the example to people like DLCD on how to write a geologic hazards code.
I guess I'm just surprised because we have all heard for the last, I've been here 18 years, and you've heard about, you don't want to build on those if they were
Oh, you
existing
definitely
before,
don't
they're
want
going to
to,
happen.
but if you want to take the risk, you have the right to.
But I'm surprised the city approves that or allows that to be in our code, that we haven't updated the code yet to stop building on the top of slide areas.
So we've made it extremely difficult for them to do.
Okay.
But if someone wants to spend the money, they, I think even in Oregon land use law, we can't prohibit someone from developing a piece of property they own unless it's 35% or more, because that's been scientifically found it's not possible with safe in any way. You can be safe in the smaller slopes with a lot of analysis and a lot of dewatering, other types of methods you can do. So there's a few things that we look at. When you look at any of these pictures here, this goes through my office, and we look at, are they really affecting a geologic hazard area? Like if there's a little tip on the property, is that really affecting a geologic hazard area? The answer is no to that. We look at that and go, that's not really a big deal, just move on. We have others where it's questionable to us. We're not sure, and we're not going to put our license on the line on that one. And so then we go to our third-party consultant, Foundation Engineering. If Foundation Engineering says, I'm not really concerned about that, then we give them a waiver that says, we're giving you a waiver, but we still make them sign an indemnity agreement that indemnifies the city. But if he says, nope, you got to do the analysis, then you have to do the analysis.
Is there just a big hole in the center of that field, or?
Yeah.
Right square in the center, there's just a...
Yeah.
There is, all right.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yep. And then the detailed analysis, so once we determine that, yes, this needs to be looked at, this is the detailed analysis we go through. And these are just a few of the requirements, the main requirements we look at. If you're building an addition, a new house, a large garage, a large shed that's 500 square feet or more, you have to do the detailed analysis if we've determined that there's a concern with geologic hazards. If you're 499, the code allows you to put that up without any issue whatsoever. Typically, that's never an issue. You never see someone trying to get out of the requirement. This is for almost all general development. That's really what we're looking at. We aren't looking for things like you want to put a storm sewer in to get water off your property. That's an allowed use, exempted use. You don't have to do that.
Isn't allowed or isn't allowed?
Is allowed.
Okay.
Yeah. Utilities are allowed to be built without any concern. If you do a very small, if you want to put a little shed up, no big deal. If you want to put a driveway pad in, no big deal. As long as it's less than 500 square feet. If you're doing tree removal, so this was a little tricky. Tree removal on slopes greater than 25% where the canopy removal exceeds 25%. So if you have an acre lot that's full of trees and you want to tear them all down, you cannot do that without going through a detailed analysis. If you want to take 20% of that lot down, that's completely allowable. But you want to put 25% or more, a quarter of that acre lot or more, then you have to go through an analysis because now you've disrupted the ground so much that it may have susceptibility to slide. Also, the other thing that we look at is, and these are either or, so they aren't an and type situation. You can meet one of these criteria and you've went into the detailed analysis. So excavation, which exceeds 2 feet in depth or 25 cubic yards. So let's say you're putting in a 200 square foot shed, but you're really trying to even out the slopes and everything on your property, and so you're digging more than 2 feet. Doesn't matter that you're less than 500 square feet. That criteria no longer applies. You now dug more than 2 feet. You got to do a detailed analysis. So it's all about trying to make sure we're not putting more weight on the land, as well as that we're not disturbing the land. Minimal disturbance is what we're always trying to go for. Some of the exemptions, one of them I mentioned was the utility lines. That's the third bullet there. If you're excavating or filling less than 2 feet or less than that 25 cubic yards, no big deal. You don't need to go through an analysis. If that structural alteration is less than 500 square feet, you don't need to go through an analysis. If you're removing a bunch of weeds, noxious vegetation is the official term in the code, no big deal. You're just trying to get your blackberries off the property, that's fine. And then emergency action. So if we know that there's an imminent issue and we work with you to see how you're going to do that and make that happen, we'll permit it after the fact, because this is something that we can't go through the type 2 process for 3, 4, 5 months, because if we don't do something now, it's an issue. And so we still permit it, but we allow that to happen right away with conversations on what they're going to do. Here's the basic standards that we do when we do analysis. The big thing is minimize cuts and fills. I don't know how many people have come in and they want to cut like the whole hill down. Like, no, you can't do that. That's not minimize cut and fills. Or you've got someone that wants to, put a big wall at the end of the property and fill the whole property. No, you can't do that. The goal is to minimize the land there. We also allow construction work only between May 1st and October 31st, with a little bit of a caveat that you can go a little early or a little later if we allow it and you prove to us that it's been dry. So a dry winter or a dry fall. You also need to follow the natural topography as much as possible. So if you have a nice sloped piece of land, whether it's one of those you saw a minute ago or like the Kenema neighborhood is the perfect example, try and make it look exactly like it looks today and put your house up near the top of the hill. Don't put it at the bottom of the hill. And then there's density restrictions. So when you're in those slopes greater than 25%, if you're between 25 and 35%, you can, zoning code no longer applies. It now goes to 2 dwelling units per acre. So the zone may say you can do 4 dwelling units, but because you're in a 25 to 35% slope, you can only be 2 units per acre. And that rounds down. So if that calculation ends up 1.9, then the answer is 1. That's how many dwelling units. We don't round up for that conservative nature. And also, not only does it limit the amount of dwelling units per acre, it limits the size of that. So we actually have a pre-application for something on Wednesday that falls in this type of situation. And so we're not only looking at the density, are they doing 2 dwelling units per acre, but also is the size of that building 4,000 square feet or less, or 50% of the surface area. And so, for example, if that lot is only 6,000 square feet, then you can only put a 3,000 square foot building on there. 3,000 square foot in surface area. So you can build up, but you can't build out. That's what that's like.
Including the parking lots.
Yeah, all development, all disturbance. Yep.
Do you have anything on retaining walls, whether they're poured concrete or loose filled big rocks? I don't see it here. You may have a second page or something. Can you do retaining walls to take advantage of some area that might have a little slope? And I realize you want to keep the general trend of the slope going, but can you put in little retainer walls and move some
Yeah.
amount of dirt? Or?
Absolutely. Pretty much, if you're going to build on a slope, it's almost always going to need a retaining wall. It's pretty much impossible to design them without walls. Whether you use the foundation of the house as a wall, whether you have an additional, usually more often than not, you've got the house that's up against the road as much as possible, but then there's usually, it's sloping down so much, they're trying to create a parking space, and so there's usually some type of wall somehow on the site, usually multiple walls. And then those walls have to meet all the wall requirements in Chapter 17 of the code of wall height and wall requirements. And then when you get into historic districts, then you've got historic requirements on the type of wall, so it starts getting pretty complex after a while.
It's interesting.
Probably the average citizen wouldn't get into too much of that, but engineering, applicants, engineers, you guys get in and work through the details of it.
Yeah, and what's interesting is both my department, engineering, and the building department both look at these because more often than not, they're on site, they're on private property, and engineering usually looks at the public way, the right-of-way. But when it comes to geologic hazards, we look at the whole property, and so then in that case, we always tell building, they're allowed to put that 5-foot wall there, and they've met the engineering standards for it to be able to hold the land in place. Now, you need to permit it from a structural standpoint and look at it from that standpoint. So we coordinate all the time when it comes to those situations.
I was going to say, it's interesting you bring that up, because up in Trailview, when they built all the homes there off Holcomb, there was a big, huge hill. They evened out the hill and pushed it down and built a 5-foot to 6-foot retaining wall of boulders in there.
Yeah.
And I don't think the city approved it because we had to call the state in, and the state said this was not approved, and they had to come in, actually, the developers of that area, and put boulders in between the boulders. There was big enough room for bears to climb in, but they had to put a toe on it and everything. But I thought the city would have approved that, but the state had to be called in. We had 7 people on the backside of that property saying this wall was not up to any kind of code. So, but again, that was, they were pushing all the dirt, and it was red soil or clay.
Yeah.
So they pushed it all back to level out the land.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if the code now is enforced to stop that kind of a thing.
Yeah, we don't. Yeah, we check all those types of things now. So yeah, I can't speak to what happened back then, but
2003.
Those things. Yeah, that was way before our code was adopted. Yeah.
So we adopted a code.
Our code was in 2010. So yeah, we didn't even have that back then.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's, and we have 2 departments looking at it plus third parties. So it's my staff. Mike Roberts and his staff, but then there's also structural engineers looking at it on the building side. There's geotechnical engineers looking on our side. So yeah, it's pretty thorough how much we look at it.
It's interesting that they've just developed that code since then. I mean, only since 2010 when we're such a slide area and prone to.
And what's even more interesting is how much those codes don't exist for the most part in the region. I found that really interesting when I came to the city. But to finish here, I just talked about the requirements when you're 25% to 35%, but again, development is prohibited in any slope that's greater than 35. So if it's greater than 35, it's not buildable. You don't have the right to build. If your entire property is 35%, it is not a buildable lot. So,
again, even if they even it out by pushing dirt around.
They're not allowed to touch a 35% lot.
Good.
Yeah. And there's additional little detailed technical requirements I didn't want to get into the weeds of here, but little things that we look at to make sure that they're doing all these engineering rotational standards and all these other things. So good news, or I think it's good news, is there are new geologic hazard state standards that will be published. They're not published yet. They've been created by the Department of Land Conservation and Development, DLCD. They used Oregon City as an example to create their code. What makes me feel really good about that is it means that what Nancy created back in 2010 is really strong, and then what we're doing today to implement that 2010 code is top-notch according to DLCD. They went to a lot of different villages, looked at a lot of different codes. Some other cities are also referenced in that document, but we have a substantial part of that document. So hopefully that makes people feel a little more at ease that we definitely have a good guide to go by and a good practice that we use.
We've had a lot of people pushing for that, like Christine and other people who
Yeah.
just been on the slides and all that.
Yeah. And there's going to be a short presentation. It's supposed to be a 15-minute presentation at the City Commission work session on October 8th. So if you're interested to hear what they have to say about their new document, feel free to come to that. But besides that, that is all I
Can
had.
you go back to slide 2?
Mm-hmm.
I think it was slide 2, where the deep, okay, so those are the, yeah, right there, just stop it there. So
Sorry.
those are the slide areas or the slopes greater than 25%.
Yes, yeah,
And you
those aren't the
said that-
slide areas, those are the slopes.
So you said somebody's already applied to build something industrial in that area or some development in that area?
We've had people look at residential development for the golf course.
Okay, back to that
Yeah.
pink one, or
Mhm.
I guess either one of them works. So slide insurance, if those people decide to put residential development or industrial there up above, that puts pressure on, who's gonna protect all those homes that I see, all those lots right there? Who's protecting them from that slide coming right over the top of them?
Does this thing have a laser thing on it?
You know what I'm
There
talking
we
about?
go.
You see all the offloader road there, you see all those, and I thought, so if you develop up here and it puts pressure on those soils, who insures or who protects those people down below?
Yeah, so what we actually, it's more complex than the geohazards of why this property is not going to develop anytime soon, but they're trying to analyze how to develop the property. You have all these houses that may get built
there.
here.
I'm talking about up there, the existing homes.
Yeah, these here.
No, over there, below the slide area.
We're going over here.
See over there, all that line of properties over there? Aren't those properties, or is that just
These
bare
guys.
land? No, up there in the corner.
You can tell me where. Yeah,
Way up there, right where you are, that whole line of
Yeah.
properties there.
yeah. So those are just existing properties that probably were built long ago before any codes existed. That would be my guess.
Right. What I'm suggesting though is if you build industrial and bigger things, impervious surfaces up
Yeah.
above, who protects those people down below from that putting pressure on that land up above to slide down on top of them?
So in this area, it's all county, so we have no say whatsoever in this area.
But it's gonna be city putting the pressure on that land,
But the city is only going to be on the edges of this,
okay?
right? And so we're not affecting, because the slopes are going this direction.
Okay?
We aren't affecting any of those really by any of the
Okay.
developments here. And what we're doing is making sure that anyone that builds along these areas or in these areas, that they do two things, that they meet all of those geologic standards through that detailed analysis and thousands of dollars of consultants they have to do. And just to make sure that we tell them how important it is to avoid geologic hazard areas, they have to sign an indemnity agreement that indemnifies the city if their house ever slides or they affect someone else. It's not our
If they
problem.
affect somebody else, that's where I was going.
Yep, either of those situations, they cannot sue us.
I would typically wouldn't have asked so many
I mean, they
questions
can,
about this,
but-
but I've heard about it for 16 years, about the slides and people who are, you
Yeah.
can't get insurance is what we hear and all that. And I keep thinking, so anything here can impact people down below. That's
Yeah.
why I asked the question.
Yep, it could, but we've got enough, I think we have enough things in place to protect those people and especially more, we protect the city. So, because that's the last thing we want to get into. We already have two situations.
Yes.
With Trillium Drive by the hospital and with Forest Edge Apartments over on the southeast part of the city that we're both dealing with right now. Both of them we're actively dealing with.
In those steep areas up there where
Yep.
you've got the pink, are there buffers that can play to buy some insurance, or not necessarily insurance, but protection for the new builder to say, yeah, we're not gonna let you build right 5 foot from the,
Right on the step.
you know,
Yeah.
you gotta be back, sort of like
So
on
these-
streams, you gotta be so far away from the stream.
Correct. There is a buffer, and that's what you're seeing in the lighter color, maybe the pinkish color. That is the 50-foot buffer. So there are buffer areas that you cannot build in either. Or if you do, you have to go through a detailed analysis.
Right.
Yeah.
And the hole that Greg identified up there, that pocket of hole up there,
Yeah.
right there, can anybody build in that area?
Sure.
Oh, I'm talking about the one just right smack in the middle. Like, it's not
Coming
connected
down
to
lower?
No, just to the left, right square in the middle. There's
It's,
a-
It's this
Oh,
one.
this little guy?
Yeah.
This little guy is not really a geologic hazard.
Okay.
So that's a manipulation of contours on an electronic map system.
Oh.
So are there a steep slope there for a little tiny bit? Maybe. Even if there is, that's not really an issue. That's a,
So it's a computer error?
it might be that steep, but that's not what causes landslides.
Yeah.
And so that little guy will get wiped out. That's not a big deal. What you're really concerned about that and that and that. These are ditches and our big ravines and things like that.
Is this some sort of Dogami map, or is this something the city created and didn't overlay for?
The contours are part of what creates the slopes. The landslide, this here comes directly from Dogami, but the slopes come from our topography.
Something up above takes pictures and the,
Yeah, the aerial photography gives us topography,
okay.
and other things along the way.
Is there a creek right there? I see Thimble Creek Drive, and I know they've talked about making this Thimble Creek. Does the Thimble Creek run through those deep pink areas?
Yeah, well,
It pretty much runs like this.
yeah, there's a creek that runs through there.
Follow,
Okay.
follow the line.
Yeah.
So that's a creek there anyway, so a natural resource.
Yeah, that'll have,
Okay.
that's an additional overlay district.
Yeah. But yeah, like I said, we have a lot of protections in place to protect the city, but also advise the property developer that, hey, if you're going to do this, you're going to jump through a lot of hoops, and if you don't meet all those, you can spend thousands of dollars and we can still say no. We try and get them to yes, because our goal is it's their property to develop. For the most part, we aren't supposed to say no, as long as we feel safe that they can develop it.
I
Yeah.
see. Okay.
So just picking some tough spots, and I haven't walked, don't know where the tough spots are. But if you look between your red and where the line we looked was the creek,
Yeah.
if you go right about there, drop down a little, yeah, right in that area where it looks pretty surrounded. And
Yeah.
can you build in there if you have an access road that winds through the top of canyons and?
Yep, you could if you wanted, yep.
Wow.
What someone might do is they might build a road right through this little area because it's, right through the buffer maybe, and then connect a road through there because people love those hilly developments. They get these beautiful views, and but they would have to go through a number of different analysis to make sure that everything was going to work properly.
If it was completely surrounded and say you had 50-foot canyons the whole way around it,
Then that wouldn't be realistic, yeah.
can you fill in a 20-foot piece of ground to get out there with a road, or?
No, because there is a requirement in some of those details I didn't provide that you're not allowed to cut or fill more than 15 feet, if I recall,
Yeah.
is what. So at some point, yeah, you're not allowed to.
You just physically can't
Yeah.
get the
There might be a nice
mathematics
land, flat land over there, but there's no way to get to it.
to,
Yeah.
yeah.
So the dark, kind of brown or black line that comes around, that's within the city limits, and anything beyond the other side,
This is all county.
that's
yeah.
all county out
Yeah,
there.
and it's not UGB, it's 100% county, yeah.
And the county's responsible, or is
County's
that owned by
responsible.
developers somehow that someday it may be developed? Because they're,
It could be developed, but the county would be the one responsible to
okay, because
permit it and take care of it
under the
properly.
governor's new law, anybody can annex in without a vote of the people, so that could come in someday, right?
It could if we increased our UGB.
Yeah.
And it
So the
is-
homes up there are in county, not in the city?
These are county, yep.
Okay.
But even in those islands of ice around their ground, somebody owns it now.
Somebody
If you go to
owns
the tax assessor's office, somebody owns
Yeah.
it, and he's playing a long shot on investment and may never pay
Yeah.
off, but.
I mean, for the most part, there's, only a handful of landowners that own all this land right here. And,
Yeah.
but they'll split it up to numerous
Right.
people over time, yeah.
Are those two little squares down there, are they somebody who didn't want to come into the annexation, or why are those there?
Do you have an answer to
They're
that?
two small little island tax
Yeah.
lots.
Okay, and are they been annexed into the city at this point? Because they opted to. Go ahead, okay, thanks. It's just kind of funny there. So everything else, that's all big one owner, if that's a big owner, those are all big owners, and those are two separate little small owners.
They're all brought into the urban growth boundary, and
Yeah.
I think they're part of a larger.
Just the way you said they're separate landowners.
Just,
Yeah,
no,
they're a
separate
separate
tax
parcel,
lots. They're
but it
separate
might
tax
be-
lots.
Okay.
I don't know
Might be
the
the same owner.
individual tax
Okay.
lot ownership pattern right now.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else about geologic hazards then?
Yeah, I think you covered all the bases, or most of the bases that we want to hear about. I know you covered 10% of it in your understanding that's manageable. There's big areas out there that probably don't even want to get into.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And we deal with these all the time. I mean, I've been in the city for a year and a half. I bet I've looked at 20 or more sites about geologic hazards. It's a very common thing, whether it be down here in the McLaughlin area, Kanema, up in Park Place. It's pretty common. Yeah. So we have people mad at us sometimes saying, I just want to do this. We're like, and we want to make sure you can do it safely. Yeah. We want to make sure you don't impact someone. We don't want to see your house run down the hill in 20 years. And so then they step back a second and go, okay, what do I need to do?
Even in the Street of Dreams that they built out Redland several years ago.
Yeah,
That land
the
slid
estates
on
up there.
huge priced homes and land.
Yeah.
It was incredible.
And we've learned so much more. So I was at a planning conference, an engineer at a planning conference. I don't know what that was about, but a great presentation by DLCD on the geologic hazards. And they talked about how much they've just learned in the last 5 years of understanding how it all works and how it interconnects and what we should do about it. So that's probably one reason in the early 2000s we knew much less back then. So we've learned a lot in the last 10 years.
I have to admit, I learned a lot listening to Christine for over the last 16 years. She's been to every planning commission, city commission, telling us so much and informing us. Now, Laura, didn't I hear that there's going to be a presentation by the Game or by the Burns here coming up, and then maybe our planning commissioner should know that.
Yeah, it's just the DLCD is going to present their draft geologic hazard guide. And that's
Different than this.
Yeah, different than this. Yeah, it's a 15-minute presentation because I was asked to keep it short, but it'll be on October 8th.
October 8th,
Yep.
7 p.m. at this here.
Is that when work sessions start?
Oh, it's a work session, not
It's a work session.
City commission.
Generally, they start at 6, but I would check the agendas because we've
Should
been
be
busy
interesting
lately.
for all of us to hear that or watch it.
Yep.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So thank you, Josh, for providing a great background. I have one small qualification to make, only just because I've been here for quite a while. We did have a geologic hazard code prior to 2010, but it was substantially updated. So I just want to say it wasn't that we didn't have one, it was just substantially updated by Nancy Kreshauer.
Okay. Was that also because you had a lot more work with the Burns and all the Dagami and all that?
I think a lot of it is we had a city engineer that had a lot of experience with geologic hazard issues, as well as learning a lot more. LIDAR, which is a light emitting radar that really came in the mid 2000s, that really allowed communities to see historic landslides. The LIDAR is, it's these emitting lasers that come from plane, and this is me not giving you the non-technical answer, but you're shooting down these lasers, and what happens is it's almost like you are looking at a hillside without trees for the first time. So a lot of historic landslides were just kind of hidden from view by everybody because of our tree canopy in our region. And so with this LIDAR work that was happening in the 2000s, and Dogami was a big supporter of that, and we were able to utilize that data, we, everywhere in the Oregon region went, oh my goodness, there's a lot more historic landslides than we ever knew. And so it's really the first time you can, in a sense, look at our topography without trees. And so that really changed a lot of people's understanding of geologic hazards issues, and then looking at how we can take that data to help us write code. And that kind of was starting in the mid-2000s, and really looking at the code update we did was providing a lot more information and background documentation, and really providing a lot more requirements, which I always said was what I really like about our new code is it requires both the geologist and the structural engineer on the private applicant side to agree on the approach. And then you have on the city side, our city, city engineering staff and our third-party geologic engineering review. And so for a long time, people would just, maybe take a soils report and then they would give that to their engineer, but they never checked back with the geotechnical engineer. So it's really, our code is requiring a lot more conversation and collaboration between all the disciplines, and then having everyone kind of understand moving forward. And so it's a less siloed approach than it previously was.
Christina, about a decade ago, under Mayor Neely, I think it was, we held symposiums. I kind of emceed them, and we were talking about what an earthquake, a 9.0 off the coast would do. I wouldn't want to live in the West Hills, but I feel safer here. But still, when they do the LIDAR and when they talk about all these different things, do they take into consideration when that 9.0 might hit, what would happen in those slide areas?
I don't know. This is where you leave my ability as a staff planner, but those are some great questions, I think, to ask in the October work session, and how earthquake events, may affect our understanding, and how that would, and maybe it already is, and I just don't know. But as always, like a lot of this, as the science comes and we learn more, how do we as a community keep up with the science, and then how do we provide a regulation? I think Josh put it perfectly, is we're always looking at our legal requirements as a city, right? Where is our legal ability to restrict development, and where do we don't have that legal ability? And so what our engineering staff is looking at is really the science of, have you proposed something with reasonable approaches that has minimized your cuts, has minimized your impact, and that rather than just accepting the initial proposal, which is a really big cut and a really big wall and a really flat backyard lot, we have the ability to say, that's not minimizing, that's maximizing, So that's one nice thing about how we can look at that.
I knew back in the day, a lot of it was regarding emergency services and how to watch over for your neighbors, and how we're not going to have a lot of services if all the bridges go out, and what's going to happen. But it's been so long, I forgot if we ever addressed the fact of what would happen in the slide areas. I know we're all told to reinforce our homes, all this. Yeah. Not a matter of if, but when, I guess, is what they say.
Yeah, and I think, I can provide, update at a future meeting about that, if that's something the Planning Commission wants.
I think the Burns brothers, Scott and they're not brothers, but Bill Burns, have the most experience and knowledge on that.
So Bill Burns works for DGAMI, the Department of Oregon Geologic and Mineral Industries, and Scott Burns is with Portland State University. So
every time there's an earthquake, they call on him.
So they both are geologists, and they both work on these geologic hazards, not related, but they often will come together and put their different hats on. And what Scott Burns does a really good job doing is he has a great presentation for property owners or neighborhood associations to say, what can you do as a neighborhood or property owner to reduce your, reduce the chance that you may have a landslide in your area. So things like, how are you putting water? Are you directly charging water into your soil? How are you dealing with your tree canopy? Taking a lot of trees out suddenly, takes away some of the roots. So he's a really good kind of day-to-day property owners. That's a little bit different than a one-time only application for a building. And so that's a nice presentation he can do as well.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a little bit tangentially related, so I'm glad we had this slide, the presentation previously. And I bring this up on a staff level because the consultant team and myself identified this spring, and we want to walk you through this issue and determine if you think additional regulations are required, and then if you do, or if the City Commission does, we'll, as planning staff, will provide options. Right now, we believe this substantially implements the intent of the Beavercreek Road Concept Plan, and I'll walk you through this issue. Like like all these, what I feel as a planning staff, we have an adopted document, and we're looking at clear and objective standards for implementation. And so I go back to the adopted document and look at kind of what direction does this document give me, and have we provided code that we think staff implements it. So this is a gray area question that we're really coming back to the Planning Commission for. So in 2008 and 2009, Metro identified upland habitat areas all throughout Oregon City. So this is all happening kind of at the same time and just after the Beavercreek Road Concept Plan was adopted the first time. So most of the areas that were identified as conservation habitat areas were located within our existing stream buffers that we had for our existing code, which used to be called our Water Resource Overlay District, which had a stream buffer, and our Geologic Hazard Overlay District. So we looked at and said, gosh, our two existing natural resource codes are already encompassing the upland habitat. And so we went to Metro and said, we have a few areas around the city where they're like little anomalies, but a majority of all the upland habitat identified by Metro is already within our existing stream buffer code, because Oregon City has a lot of canyons. And so that's where the habitat areas were related to buffer canyons. We don't have kind of large upland habitat areas not related to streams. Some other places in the metro region did have that. We did not because of our topography. Title 13, which is a section of the Metro Functional Code, Functional Plan, looked at taking both stream buffers for water quality and upland habitat for wildlife and putting them together. So people call this Title 13. It's like we're marrying the health of our streams and the health of our habitat together. And so the city had to show that they were Title 13 compliant. And we did do that. So the attached in the agenda is a memo from Metro saying, we believe, yes, you have met the requirements to show that your upland habitat and your water quality is encompassed in your overlay districts. And what additionally we said is in the areas where there's city-owned parks, and there's any upland habitat that happens to kind of pop outside of our regulatory buffer of streams, we will additionally regulate that. So things like Singer Hill Park, let's see, that was a big one. Things related to park space, I think Singer Hill was a big one. I'm trying to remember other ones, but any things, maybe something related to Clackamas Park, something that we made sure that we were regulating that habitat area. So, for instance, this conservation area in the Beavercreek Road Concept Plan, any park area that has habitat outside of a natural resource overlay district would suddenly be regulated. So it's also proactive in the future. So any new parks that take in upland habitat will be regulated through the Natural Resource Overlay District. So staff went through the initial plan, which you see there on your left, and looked at areas that were identified for habitat and compared those to the metro habitat. And what staff found, myself, was that there were some few areas where they didn't align. And so the question is, we have some areas that are not part of the metro identified habitat. We don't quite know exactly why some of those areas are the way they are. A good example is this area right here, where my arrow is. It's shown as some habitat area, but it's nicely squared off exactly to a property line. So there was still some, there was still some analysis and proposal that was still related, not necessarily complete to science. It was still looking at kind of the plan. And so staff has identified some of these additional areas that you see in what color we call that, mustard? Yeah. That are outside of the Natural Resource Overlay District. Now, this area in the East Side Conservation District, we remember from my presentation a couple weeks ago, half of this is proposed to be a park. So I don't know if it's going to be this half or this half, but half of this area is supposed to be a park. So that area, if it is upland habitat, will be protected.
What determines, does Audubon Society get called in? What determines what's a wildlife area, upland? Because there was a lot in Park Place where all the eagles and other ones were in the trees, they're all gone, so all the wildlife's gone.
So the Metro Identified Habitat was a large region-wide study that was done in the mid-2000s. Then that data was brought into this 2008, 2009
Who did that study? Because we never saw anybody come into the Park Place area to see
I
that.
don't know.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, how do you determine? Is it the birds? Is it little critters on the ground? And
it was probably most likely it was a consultant study that looked, because they're looking region-wide, so it was looking at the existing science, the existing inventories to date, aerial photographs, some site checks. It's probably a combination of all those.
This area looks like a good coyote protection area.
So real quickly, so this area here, once again, got that kind of half of this section here that is mustard yellow would be brought in. Then you have the areas related to the geologic hazards. So that is mainly this area as well, and potentially this area. The area where you have a mismatch where you don't have the geologic hazards over the upland habitat or the natural resource are kind of these areas because they're flatter. And this kind of area, even though there is some geologic hazard here as well. So really what I saw as the biggest mismatch is this area right here. And where we're at right now is we have a compliant Title 13 Natural Resource Overlay District that looks at upland habitat and water quality. We have our existing geologic hazards that look at landslides and steep slopes. And then we have this area. So it's, as this point, staff does see that we've substantially implemented the goals of the open space of the plan. So there are options the Planning Commission can have. If you agree that this approach using our existing city codes substantially implements, you don't have to do anything. You could secondarily make an amend a sentence or two to the concept plan that explains the implementation approach. So since the concept plan complies with itself because you've written in how you're going to implement it. Or you could request staff to look at additional areas for upland habitat, though most likely it would not be done through our Natural Resource Overlay District or geologic hazards, probably something specific to Park Place. And it would probably be generally for this area. The reason why staff has not recommended anything right now and is waiting for Planning Commission recommendations for next steps is that's also in our campus industrial, Title IV industrial lands. So, that's some of our large jobs areas. So, at this point, staff does believe that we substantially comply. So I'm looking kind of direction for the Planning Commission. You have a couple options, and I can walk those through with you if you have questions.
Before you move from this map, are intermittent drainage, is that considered intermittent streams that feed the streams? Are they protected in any way?
They do. Intermittent streams have 15-foot buffers on either side. Especially in flat areas.
So they go dry sometimes during the summer? They go dry, but they're still protected. And
then there's some areas like this dotted area that's actually existing culverted. So we have,
what?
There's an existing water culvert. So some of the stream is existing culvert. And through our city code, we can't require it to be opened, though, if there's a park, we want to open it, and it was a park piece, we could do that as part of a parks project. But once it is culverted, we can't require them to open it up.
So then I was looking at wetland, I was looking around the map, I only see one little splotch up there for a wetland, way up there.
And there's some here, but this is a little bit related to
there is, I didn't see any of the green there, but I was wondering, that's not near a stream, how do we get a wetland way up there?
Sometimes it's related to how the topography of the land is, and sometimes you have kind of sheet water flow and a kind of a depression of a land area.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, but that wetland, if it's existing and our inventory already has a 50-foot protection
What's
on it.
class 1? What does that mean?
I need to look at it, sorry,
It's at the very bottom of the color codes.
let's see,
Class
this one
1
right
is
here.
something.
Yeah.
We'll have to get, well,
Okay.
this would be, must be part of the riparian area, because this is the riparian area, and this is the buffer on either side of the stream. And then this area is potentially related to the stream buffer and the,
Just didn't see anything in that lime green code up there.
right here?
Yeah.
There's a little bit over here.
Yeah, where that culvert,
Oh, right
where the
over
culverted
there.
section
And the
is,
culvert
the
up
bottom.
there.
Okay, thanks.
Right there, yeah.
Am I going colorblind?
Yeah, and I apologize, my
It's a lot to see.
eyesight is not the greatest with these glasses. All right,
Thank you.
okay. So the last slide is about the master planning requirement and clear objective standards for housing. This is a pretty straightforward slide. Senate Bill 1051 was passed in 2017 that requires jurisdictions to provide clear and objective standards for housing. So 10 years, a little more than 10 years later, how cities implement concept plans are a little different. Especially areas that are already in the city limits, so we have that large area that's already been annexed. If some of the property hadn't been annexed, you could have some negotiations of part of annexation, kind of what Park Place is doing, about kind of what future development can require they can offer going through master planning process, or we can potentially require it as part of an annexation process. But once you are already in the city limits, we have to provide a clear and objective path. So a lot of those properties south of Loader Road that have housing, we have to provide a clear and objective path. And clear and objective is, I call it the metric approach. You have to create standards that you can measure. So you can require transparency, but you have to have a metric. So 60% of a building needs to be transparent, or you need 15 feet of windows, or this is your setback, or this is your height limit, or you can use composite siding, but you can't use stucco. I'm just making up, what. So it has to be someone, in a sense, clear and objective is really almost like, can you fill out a worksheet? Can you fill out really, this is what I'm doing, this is how I meet it. This is what I'm doing, this is how I meet it. Which is why, and we'll be talking about this at the next meeting, why we have to create the Parks Acquisition Code, because we have to create a clear and objective standard for dedicating parkland. Because we can't say, go through the master planning process and we'll negotiate it at the master planning process. We can't do that for residential properties now. And so what staff, because we have this clear and objective standard for housing, and we're creating clear and objective code, the only properties that don't have to have clear and objective standards are our industrial or employment lands. So we don't have to create clear and objective standards for that. But looking at the goals and purpose of the concept plan is really to reduce barriers for development. So we kind of, in a sense, as a city, we should be looking at that as well for clear and objective standards, because we want to provide the vision for our community, and we want to reduce any misunderstanding. We want to provide clarity for future businesses that want to come in. If you want to come in for a business in Oregon City, these are the things you need to do, not, well, let's wait for the master planning meeting and we'll negotiate it out. I mean, that's not reducing any barriers for employment. So at this point, knowing that we have to provide clear and objective standards for housing, and one of the main goals of the concept plan is to, reduce barriers and bring jobs to the community, staff is recommending that we don't require master planning for any of the uses in the concept plan area. So not require master planning for any of the industrial development. What that would mean is, at the time of the code amendments, the concept plan would be open up and an exhibit would be added that redlines out, that removes that requirement from the plan. So at the time that the City Commission adopts any ordinances that approve the rezoning of the area and adopts these zoning code amendments, they would amend the Beavercreek Road concept plan to remove that requirement. for housing, we need to be legally compliant with House Bill 1051. If we did not do that, someone could sue the city and win at the Land Use Board of Appeals because we are not compliant with House Bill 1051, if we did not provide clear and objective opportunities for housing. That being said, any development application can choose to do a master plan. So if a developer said, yeah, I like your code, but I have a different approach, and I still think I meet the intent of the plan, and I'm going to go through the master planning process, they can. But we as a city have to provide a clear and objective option if you have housing involved in your development application.
So that's a big statement you're making. There are a pretty large collection of things. You're going to, and I'll try and simplify it, you're trying to remove the master plan process from the Beavercreek concept plan as we will know it for now to the next 6 months or whenever it gets finalized. And it'll be finalized with the master plan out of the picture. But there's an option that a developer might want to use that option, and he can make his application based on, yeah, I want to do a master plan. And you recognize that, and but you're protecting some things there, or simplifying things for the whole process.
Right. And this is really a response to our requirement to provide that clear and objective path. There's always been a requirement for clear and objective standards for needed housing, and so there's been no debate over the years, what is needed housing, and has a city done its housing inventory enough, and what is not needed housing, and what the legislature really did in Senate Bill 1051, they said all houses needing housing, and we don't have to get, cities don't have to get bogged down into this kind of existential discussion of what is and what is not needed housing. All housing is needed, and therefore all housing should be clear and objective.
We're not taking anything away from anybody or moving it off the chart
No.
at any time, but it is a maneuver to move forward with the concept plan.
Correct.
And leave an option to add
Yeah.
the master planning to that, and then it would look like master plans in the rest of the city, the whole city would.
So if the concept plan was not amended to remove the requirement for master plans, we'd be putting ourselves in a place where someone could potentially, appeal any decision that we
Taking
weren't in
far more
compliance
risk,
with the concept plan, because look, the concept plans, you have to do master planning. And so we're trying to, really in a sense, this concept plan was adopted in 2008, and the legal requirements for housing has changed, and we need to update that based on new legislative requirements. So I'm available to answer your questions, but on a staff level, I'd really like Planning Commission discussion and directions on really the two main issues that staff has recommendations this evening. One is the upland habitat question, and two is the master planning.
Can you go back to the upland?
Sure, yeah.
So I can see what it is again?
Yeah.
So what are you asking us to approve?
So I'm not recommending right now at this time, recommending any revisions to our code amendments, because I see that based on the Natural Resource Overlay District and the geologic hazards, we substantially implement the plan, and we can make findings for that. If the Planning Commission wants to pursue additional code amendments to kind of address those mustard areas that are not in the geologic hazard or Natural Resource Overlay District, that, staff can come back with some options of how you would do that. The Planning Commission could also recommend, a lot like the master planning, that if there is any question about substantial compliance, the Planning Commission could amend the concept plan again with additional findings.
So if we accept what you have here, all we need to do is say, present this to the city commission as is, for both this and the master plan.
Correct.
And they're gonna go through this again and ask you the same, similar questions like we've asked tonight. Okay. Do we have to make any move or just say we agree?
No, I think on my end, it's more of a, do you have additional work for staff to do? Do you want me to come back?
For
Do you want
myself,
me?
but how is I would say no for myself, but how?
I'm fine with what you've done.
So am I.
Yep.
Yeah.
What do we know, or what do I know that needs to be in there that you haven't ever thought about?
The city
You know,
commission.
Yeah.
We're going to be hanging out on a dangerously long limb that somebody can chop our arm off and.
And
you
as
guys
we
know
get
what you're
to,
talking about. So I agree
Yeah.
with what you're saying.
Right.
and as we get to the final, adoption ordinance, or, city attorney and assistant city attorney may have some legal, sentences that maybe we want to add to the concept plan that can since memorialize the conversations that have been having this fall about this and other issues.
So this goes to the city commission, they approve or deny it and either send it back, but for the most part, we're pretty well done with this section of the,
Yeah, if you aren't recommending any additional amendments, in a sense, you are also agreeing that says, with our geologic hazards and natural resource, we are, we agree
Sounds like
that
we
we are
agree.
substantially
Yeah, I think so.
implementing the
Yeah.
intent.
we're all in agreement.
So that would be for this one. We may not want to go to the next one, the master plan.
I'm fine
There, I
with that
think-
too.
Yeah, that's,
Oh, I am too. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have something you're concerned about in that?
No, I'm just saying here, it looks like
Yeah. So,
they're going to they want to recommend that we remove it.
yeah.
I also have public comment this evening from Christine Kaczynski I want to pass over. So before there's a final, any final direction, I want to make sure that we
So
don't cut off
we
public
may be
comment.
treating them both the same.
Probably. But again, there's enough people on the city commission that are gonna look over this as well, good eyes with Frank and
But I'd like to
Michelle.
land at a pretty firm position that says,
We
doesn't
approve it
care.
as presented to us tonight.
And is this in comment to what we're talking about right now? Okay, so Christine, would you like to come up? Sure.
Thought she was gonna fall asleep out there waiting for it.
How many do you need?
4.
Well, I need one for the file, and then you can give.
5, and do you need one for?
I'll need one for the file and 4 for the commissioners.
You'll see it'll become a part of the record, Christine.
Yeah.
Oh my God, how much did you bring us?
Is that all right?
Yeah, no, you can keep that one. I just need 4 plus 1 for me.
Okay, Christine, could you state your full name and your residing city?
Yes, I don't live in a city. I'm Christine Kaczynski. I live in unincorporated Clackamas County
Okay.
on the famous Holly Lane. I brought a lot of stuff to go through tonight, and I'm going to go through it pretty quick. I've given you exhibits. I've numbered them 1 through 8, and they're in order. I will be putting in more information into the record within the next 2 weeks. Oregon City is comprised of some of the most difficult and dangerous topography in the state. I continue to be shocked that the city would even consider using Holly Lane as a freeway for motorists to reach the I-205. I'm concerned this is being done to preserve Beavercreek Road because the grade separated intersection at Beavercreek Road and Highway 213 was never built. And I feel the people of Holly Lane are taking the brunt of that decision. I'm going to start going through my exhibits. Page 1 is a newspaper article, and it is a reporter that was talking to Scott Burns after the Oso, Washington landslide. And here is where Scott states all those people lost everything. And the one thing that they also didn't have, no insurance covering them. On Exhibit 2, I've given you some pages out of an application for landslide insurance. The first page on the application from the insurance company has a question that I've highlighted. Is the building in a known landslide area, or have there been incidents of a landslide within 1 mile of the property? On Exhibit 3, I've given you a lot of the exclusions, which are many. As a matter of fact, there's so many exclusions in these insurance policies in the surplus lines that they actually virtually never pay out. And they will cover none of the infrastructure. Exhibit 4, I've given you a copy of my denial. My husband and I tried to get landslide insurance in 2015. We have no landslide on our property, but we were denied because, gee, we live within 1 mile of 6 landslides. So that's key criteria. If you live within 1 mile of a landslide, you're not going to get it. On Exhibit 5, I've included an email from Professor Scott Burns regarding Thayer Road. We had a concern all along about Thayer Road and the huge landslides that are a problem every year. As a matter of fact, Clackamas County is spending from $100,000 to $190,000 per year just to patch this, and it keeps falling. And Scott is saying it's not going to stop, and this road is not going to take large amounts of traffic, which could be a problem because when people don't want to turn left, they're going to go right, and they're going to try and get around traffic hazards and go down Redland Road. This road isn't going to take it, so if you take over this road, you're going to have an awful lot of repairs. Exhibit 6 is the Oregon City Comprehensive Plan. This plan clearly states landslides can be triggered by heavy rains, ground shaking from earthquakes, and heavy traffic, and undercutting the lower edge of a slope, which can be caused by erosion along stream banks and by development such as cuts in the road. If Oregon City took over Holly Lane and tried to widen it, they would be going against their own comprehensive plan, as well as the requirements of the state of Oregon.
Does everyone here know where Holly Lane is? It cuts down there, okay.
Number 7 handout. Right here somewhere. The Trail News. I told you a few weeks ago I would show you just one way that this city is not meeting Goal 7 nor Goal 2. Since April of 1996 until the fall issue of this year, there have been many articles in the Trail News such as City Sewers, City Streets, National Night Out, Stormwater Master Plan Update, construction projects, but there's never been one article in, 24 years about landslides. This, I'm assuming, is supposed to be an educational thing that is sent around to the people. People are not getting educated. The last time that there was a class for the community was when Nancy was here, and I helped her on that. There has been nothing. There's no mention in here at all to educate people what to look for. What do you do when your windows won't open or shut? What do you do when you have a floor that's tilting or you have cracks in your foundation? Where are you going to go? Who are you going to see? Who are you going to talk to? There is nothing in here educating these people to that, and also nothing for emergency preparedness. No one here is ready for landslides, and they happen suddenly. It's going to happen if we have a terrible earthquake or if we have more rains and floods. Holly Lane's had 6 landslides. I've seen them. I've seen the money that my neighbors have been out. There is state law that requires the city to educate the people on landslides, and I've given the state law here. The people of Oregon City also need to be educated in the Dogami landslide maps. They should be told before they buy a property in Oregon City to put your address in the Dogami landslide maps and see how far away you are from a landslide. Are you sitting on a landslide? Are you within a mile of a landslide? And they should be told there's no insurance. If you have a landslide on your property, you are going to be 100% liable for everything. That's infrastructure, house, barn, sheds, everything is going to come out of your pocket. That's why most people walk away from their homes and go bankrupt. I have talked to Oregon City in the past, twice, about please go to Salem. I'm just one person. I'm not going to create huge change, but the city can. The city can go to Salem and say, hey, you want us to build. We can't build on landslides. These people can't get insurance. They can't get coverage. People should not be buying in homes in landslide areas and not be told what they're moving into. I feel Oregon City has been derelict in its duties to protect the lives and the property of its people. And by state law, they must begin an intensive plan to educate their people into the dangers and hazards of living in a landslide area, of which Oregon City is highly comprised of. Difficult topography. Exhibit 8. You have a map. I've highlighted a small area on this map in yellow. That's approximately where the Beavercreek Road concept plan is. The reason I'm giving you this map of the greater Oregon City area on top of the hill is I want you to notice there's probably more than 100 landslides on here. Due to the criteria that Lloyd's of London puts down when you try to get landslide insurance, not one of these people in this entire area is going to be capable of getting insurance. My husband and I also were denied earthquake insurance. So once you're denied landslide, you're also denied earthquake. So yeah, I'm sitting on a powder cake. I'm hit either way, and these people are too. And that's why I encourage this city to go to Salem and do something about the landslide regulations. There are none. People are moving into places that they shouldn't move into. And every now and then we see an accident like the homes on Newell Ridge Drive that are worth $450,000. They're lucky if they get $50,000 out of their homes now. The home behind the hospital, they had no insurance. The people on Oak Tree Terrace off of Holcomb, no insurance. There is nothing for the people. And the reason I'm encouraging the city to do this is that I honestly want to see this city develop. I want services. I want people to be happy. I want them to want to come to Oregon City. And the only way that they can do that is if they feel safe and if they have a city working for them. Again, I would say, I can do nothing. I've done everything in 15 years that I can to turn wheels. But I can tell you, if the city doesn't do something, I will go to the senators. This has to be changed. It's not fair for the people. Thank you. I will be submitting more information to you. I didn't want to drown you tonight, and I didn't know how many people were going to be here testifying. So I will get that to you. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, Christine.
And this is Exhibit 1 in tonight's record.
Pardon me?
This will be entered as Exhibit 1 in tonight's record.
Okay. All right, so we'll move on to GLUA 19-00021, annexation, zone change, and 7-lot subdivision on Maple Lane Road. Continuance.
Yes, staff's asking for a continuance to October 28th.
Oh, God, for Halloween.
Does that require a motion?
You want to make a motion, Doug?
So moved, yeah.
Okay, I second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Could we have a vote? Do you want to raise a hand?
Continue.
Aye.
Yep.
Go last.
Usually she calls the roll.
Oh,
Either way, you can do it. I heard all of you say aye.
Yes.
Sounds like you
Yes.
guys are all say aye for the
Yes.
continuance. All right, so
Motion carries.
yeah, it'll be continued to October 28th in this room, 7 p.m. for the Planning Commission. Thank you.
Okay. Any other communications?
speaking of October 28th, we would,
For Halloween.
2 days for Halloween, we would like to schedule the planning commission interviews. So as you know, we have an open position for Commissioner Mahoney, and so we're trying to fill that position. We have received a number of applications. I wanted to tentatively schedule it in at 6 to 7 p.m. on October 28th. That's going to be an hour before you normally show up here, if that works for the
Last time we didn't interview, Dan just chose what he wanted, so why are we interviewing this time? Remember, he didn't allow us to interview.
No, so the interview process would be all the planning commission comes, we invite the mayor to attend as well. Each of the planning commissioners ranks who they want to appoint, and the mayor is ultimately the
But what I was
person who
pointing
appoints.
out, he interviewed all the newer people this year on his own in private with you instead of before all of us.
Oh, this last
previous
round.
planning commissioners, yeah, why is it changed again?
That is the process. This is to do it again, how we did it
We
before,
used
in
to
the
do.
public, in
So
this
what I was asking,
open
is Dan
round.
changed it himself, or is it, Laura, is that you changing the process?
I coordinate with the city recorder's office, who touches base with the mayor. So the process this time is familiar.
I can't be here on the 28th, that's 3 days before Halloween, but
I didn't think about that.
And that's October 28th?
October 28th.
An hour before the planning.
Yeah, 6 to 7, if that's okay. And if we have, we may start at 7:15 if we need a little bit extra time for the planning commission hearing, but we won't start earlier than 6. And then we'll give you food.
Do you know, is there going to be anything to decide on, or is it going to be more at Beavercreek and for the 28th? I mean, just looking at what you have in process.
October 28th will be,
Oh, wait, we just did the continuance for that one. Never mind.
it's
Sorry.
going to be planning commission interviews from 6 to 7, the continuance, so it'll be the annexation zone change, which is relatively, I wouldn't expect it to take an excessive amount of time that a lot of annexation zone changes can take. Also, it may be continued from that date as well. We're a little bit of uncertainty there. And then the last thing is the Beavercreek, to talk about the transportation.
would put it on that night.
But
Putting transportation on the night that I busiest. Because that's transportation,
No,
that's
that
my
moved to
main,
November.
my main interest is transportation.
so you know what? Just because you said that, it sounds like we'll move it to November. So
I think
it will
Christina was
just
gonna do
be-
it anyway.
no, it's just for that. We want to make sure you're here. So it'll just be the interviews and the zone change. So it should be just those two things. There's nothing else on the agenda.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. I would like to adjourn the Oregon City Planning Commission meeting of Monday, September 23rd, 2019.